Hi everyone. So today we're going back to my beloved Copics. So we're going to draw. We have a face, Allie, who I'll share with you in a moment, and we're going to draw her face. We'll use some Copics, then we'll use colour pencils, and we'll see how far we get. We might not finish her today, but if we don't, you can finish it at home. But hopefully we'll get a long way through doing it. Let me just switch my view. I wanted to show you the paper I use first. So I use these Japanese books called Midori cotton. Normally I use this one, which is, if I just turn it up, you can see it's quite thick. Oh, out of focus. Let's get the focus back. It's quite a thick book and the paper is really fine, but it's really strong and I love it. But I couldn't get one. When I finished my last one of these, I couldn't get hold of this. So I tried some different Midori cotton paper, which are these ones. So these come in a pack of 3. I'll just show you. They come in a pack of 3. And I'm using the first one of this 3. They're much thinner, which is nice if you want to finish a sketchbook quite quickly. These don't have those. The big ones take me more than a year to finish because they have so many pages. I don't know how many pages exactly, but these ones don't have too many. So you can finish these quite quickly. They never tell you how many pages are in them, but the big ones will last forever. So these are the ones I'm using at the moment. The paper's a little bit thicker. I don't like it as much as the other ones, but it's still pretty nice.
What size is the booklet?
So these are A4 in
A4?
A4 in Europe, so like 8 by 12.
Yeah,
about 8 by 12. But you can get them smaller. They cost less. I have got a smaller one actually somewhere. I wondered if I can find it. No, I don't think I can easily, but I have got smaller ones. So you can get an 8 by 5 size, which is A5 here, if you prefer. But I love this paper. It's really nice with Copics. It does bleed through. So that's the back of my last drawing. So it does bleed through, but I like the bleed through. And I like the way the paper absorbs Copics. If you don't want bleed through, you have to use either marker paper or stone paper. I saw my first stone paper notebook a couple of weeks ago when I was in London, but I picked it up and it's so heavy. It never occurred to me that if you make paper out of stone, it's going to be heavy, but it's really heavy. So yeah, I couldn't carry that around because it weighs too much. So this is my favorite paper. But I also like, if you can't get hold of these, the Moleskine sketchbook, not the watercolor one, but the sketchbook is really nice with Copics. Luke term.
that's the one I'm using.
Yeah, Luke term is also really nice. Yeah, I don't know if they have large pads of Luke terms, but I've used the smaller Luke term, and also Hahnemuller, the smooth paper, the Nostalgia is nice, but this is my favorite. And if I can get hold of Midori cotton paper, then I'll always use it. If I can't get it, then I have to try something else. So I've tried others, they're good substitutes, but any kind of smooth paper, watercolor paper isn't good. And the reason it's not good is that it soaks up all the ink. So your Copics will dry out really quickly. But also when I'm working, I like to keep my paper quite wet because the Copics kind of soak into each other. So, and that's why I like this paper. It stays quite wet. Yeah, watercolor paper will dry them up. So I don't recommend it at all. Your Copics won't last anywhere near as long either because they'll just suck up all the ink. But any kind of smooth drawing paper is fine. I mean, I just noticed that they describe this paper as textured. And I don't think it's textured at all. To me, I've always felt like it's one of the smoothest papers that I found. But so, yeah, I like smooth. So we're going to start with Allie's face. So I've got, this is just a regular pencil, just a, I don't know, is it HB? I think it's HB. I can't remember what leads I put in it, but I'm pretty sure it's HB. So to start, I'm just gonna, usually I start with like a cross. So I look at the face and just kind of imagine, I'm actually drawing it now, but I would normally just imagine a cross through the middle of the face. because the face might be tilted. In this case, it's not. Her face is absolutely straight. But if you draw a cross between going down the middle of the face and across the eyes, that'll give you a really good idea of the tilt of the face. So I generally don't draw the outside of the face at this point. So I will just draw myself across to tell me where to put the eyes, basically, and the nose. So, and I almost always start drawing with this eye, which I guess is her right eye, but it's the left eye as we're looking down at it. So just because I've always drawn them that way. You don't have to start here, you can start somewhere else. And when you're drawing an eye, you have to be kind of careful not to just draw what you think an eye looks like, which would be, you know, we always think that an eye looks like this. Oh, I can see that's out of focus too. It's hard to see. There we are. But it isn't always. So it's important to look at the eye and the shape of it and try and draw what you can see. So I find that it really helps to think about these spaces, the whites in the eye. That always helps me get the iris positioned. Not so much by looking at the iris, but by looking at these spaces on either side. And I can see already, I can see that this space here is okay, but this one here isn't quite right. So I'm just going to readjust my drawing to try and make sure that the space I have there is similar to the space I've got in the photo. And then I'm going to come over to the other eye, which in my line, the line I've drawn across is a little bit lower. So I'm going to put it in a bit lower. And again, I'm kind of drawing in her iris and looking at these shapes just to try and make sure that these shapes are okay. And there's usually, the space between the eyes is usually about one eye wide. It looks like this eye is much smaller than that one, but it's just because the hair is falling over it and the kind of angle of the photo. And once I've got the eyes, I'll kind of just put in the edges of the nose just so I know where it is. And then we can add the eyebrows. This is one of the things I find most difficult, is getting this distance between the eye and the eyebrow right. You can measure it. I try and just eyeball it. But if you wanted to measure it, you can use, I'll just show you how you can measure it. So if you want to measure it, I tend to use something like a pencil that has text on the side of it. And then I'll just lay my pencil by the eye. So here I'm using this kind of, I don't know what it is, but this band around the pencil, I'm putting that on the inside of the eye and then looking at how far it goes out in the text. So I can see that it goes to here, and then I'll just move it across and figure out. So actually the space between her eyes is pretty much spot on, the same as this eye. You can use a ruler. If it's easier to use a ruler, just use a ruler and measure. So if I measure with this ruler, then this eye is about 3/4 of an inch. And this eye is pretty much the same. So it's a bit less, actually. It's about what, no, it's not. It's pretty much the same. And then the space in the middle, she has perfect features, because the space in the middle may be slightly more than 3/4 of an inch. But if you want to check that they're all the same size, you can just do that, just measure them. If you have a ruler handy, just use a ruler. So, and I'm just looking, I haven't drawn her eyelid in here. Kind of important to draw the eyelids in before you draw in the eyebrows, because otherwise you'll get the distance wrong. Because we're kind of looking at the space between the eyelid and the eyebrow. And I think it's sort of there. I think that one is too wide, so I'm just going to make it a bit smaller. So these lines for me are just guidelines. So I'm going to go on and ink it in a moment. So what I'm doing at first is just drawing myself some guidelines for inking. just because every time I draw her face, it becomes more accurate. So this allows me 2 goes. I'm doing a go with pencil, and then I'll have another go with ink. And I've got some very light blue pencil marking out the sizes of her face that I did before we started. You don't need to do, I do that so that I can draw it quicker, basically. So you don't need to draw as quick as I do as well. You can slow down, because you can come back, you can watch this class again and again. So don't feel like you have to draw as fast as I do. I've got various tips and tricks that I use to help me to draw faster in class. And I've got faster since I've been teaching online, just through habit of having to do it. I always struggle with mouths. Don't like drawing them. Really find it quite hard to get them to look right. And that doesn't look right. It looks, yeah. I will have another go with ink in a moment, but I'm going to leave it as it is for now and not spend too long fussing over it. The more I fuss over it, the less likely it is to be right. So now I'm just going to try and draw in the edge of her face. And again, we kind of think that the edge of the face is going to be an oval. It's not an oval, you know, she's got these really strong bones here and there. So there's a, yeah, that's kind of the top of the cheekbone here. And then she's got this bone from her jaw. So she's got really nice shaping. And it's kind of nice if, you know, the more you get that right, the more likely the drawing is to look like her. And she's got a really strong square chin there as well. And then I'm just looking at where the neck comes down. So usually if I'm trying to figure out where the neck is, I'm usually kind of looking at where it comes from the side of the face, but also where it comes across here. So it comes from just below her. It's the height of just below her lip, which means that I have drawn it much too high here. So this is why you do these things. This is why you kind of look, because I can see, if you look here, her neck is here. It's level with the bottom of her chin, whereas I've got it level, not the bottom of her chin, the bottom of her lip. I've got it level with the middle of her lip. So I need to correct it because it's not right. And this is what the whole time I'm drawing, I'm kind of looking at where things should be in reference to other parts of her face. So again, you can do it with this bone here. You have this kind of bone. I'm looking at, if you look at where that lines up with, it's kind of slightly below her top lip. And for the eye up here, I mean, you can draw in your pictures, and if you've got an iPad, you can just duplicate the photo and then draw these lines on it, these guidelines, and they'll help you. So the bone up here, actually it's there, I think I've drawn over it. It's just below her eye. So this bone, I've got this bone here and it's too high. So this is what I mean by the more goes you have at it, the more likely you are to be accurate, because each time you'll look. So this kind of, and this bone here is below her eye, not above it as I had it at first. And this one here is kind of level with her top lip, so that's fine. But for drawing the neck comes here. So I had it way over and it would have looked really strange. So on this side, we can see her neck here. So it's just below that kind of dimple in her chin. So here the neck comes somewhere like that. And on your first pencil drawing, you can draw all those lines in if it helps. I would just say do whatever helps you to do it. So you can draw them in because we're going to erase them. We're going to ink over it and erase them. And I'm just looking now at these lines here under her eyes, which help a lot. If you can figure out where they are, that helps a lot in figuring out where the shadows are, especially. So I'm going to draw her jumper in. Jumper, sweater. Sorry, that's English. We call sweaters jumpers. So we have shoulder there. This shoulder looks higher. It's a lot higher. They're more like that. And then I'm going to look at this side of her face here. So I'm going to draw myself a line for where the face is covered, but then I'll try and draw in those curls. So that curl comes down to her lip level. And then we can draw in the rest. So her parting goes kind of there. So hair is a shape. It's not just lines. So I always draw the shape of it because that I know that will help me. So I'm looking at these shapes here. This shape, this shape. Of course, we'll add some lines later, but I think it really helps to, first of all, just look at the shape of the hair and how it sits. Of course, we don't have to draw it exactly as it is. I mean, that would take forever. And I'm not a realist artist, so I'm drawing my impression of what the hair looks like rather than trying to draw it perfectly accurately. I love her haircut. So I'm just drawing shapes there to represent some of the curls that are there. And then on this side, so her hair comes out to maybe about there. And then we can add the shapes that we can see. So there's this shape here, there's this shape here, and then this shape. So there's basically 3 main shapes. There we have some hair there. And the hair that's coming down here, we can barely see her ears, but I've just noticed we can see a little bit of her ear here. So I'm going to put it in. So if you look at someone straight on, usually the bottom of their ear is level with the bottom of their nose. So this photo is obviously at a slight angle because her ear is higher than the bottom of her nose. But if you wanted to draw a face from the imagination, then you would have the bottom of the ear more or less level. Usually the top of the ear is level with the center of the eyes, the eye line, and the bottom is level with the nose. But obviously when we're dealing with photos, people's faces aren't necessarily straight on. So I think I've made her hair too long there, but that's more or less the shapes. And now I feel like I've got enough. I think the shoulder's a bit low, so I'm going to raise it a bit. I feel like I have enough now to do the inking. So I'm going to switch to fineliner. So I've got these Unipin fineliners, which I love. Mainly I love them because they're not black. They're dark grey. And I have lots of other black fineliners. But Unipin, yeah.
No, I have a question.
Yeah.
Since I'm on a split screen on the iPad, I can't tell. How much of the eyeball have you drawn in?
I mean, I've drawn her iris and I've drawn the shape of her eye, but I haven't drawn anything more than that.
But you've got the iris. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So that's all right. So these pens are dark grey. They also do some light grey ones, which I might have here. I'm looking to see. Yes. So the reason I don't use the light grey is because they look pretty much the same colour as, if I show you, they look like drawing with a pencil. So, which is great if you want your drawing to look like you're drawing with a pencil. But if you're going to ink over it and then erase the pencil, you can't see where your pencil lines are when you've used these. I've tried using them and I can't. So if you were going to draw from scratch with a fineliner, then these would be great. But they're not ideal if you want to draw over pencil lines and then erase, because I can't see where my pencil lines are because they look so similar. So I like the dark grey ones, but they're just a bit less intense than a black. So I'm going to start again with her eyes, or the shape of her eye. I'll do the shape of her iris first. I don't bother drawing in the pupil at this point. I'll do that with colour pencil in my the final stage of the drawing. I don't use Copic black to do that pupil because sometimes it feathers too much and it's hard to get a really defined shape. So I almost always do the pupil with pencil. And I don't draw the eyebrows in either. Not the eyebrows, sorry, the eyelashes at this point. I'll do them later with, again, with colour pencil. I used to do everything. When I first started, I did everything with Copic. But then when I figured out how to use colour pencils with them, it seemed so much easier to use colour pencils for the details. So I've drawn in her eyes. These are the lines, like the lines underneath her eyes. I'm going to use a finer fine liner. This one's a 0.5, so it's a thicker line. Because I want those lines in, but I don't want them to be really strong. So I'll use the finer one. So I use a 0.5 and a 0.1. But I change my mind and sometimes I use others. But right now, these are the ones I'm using. So I'll draw in the bottom of her nose. I love drawing noses. I know I was saying I don't like drawing them. Drawing mouths, but I love drawing noses. Mainly because I find them very straightforward. So for her lips, I'm just going to mark the top and the bottom, but I'm not going to draw around the edges. To the side of the face. And all the time I'm doing this, I'm looking again at what I've drawn and just checking how accurate it is and changing it if I think it isn't. Because this is kind of your last chance to do that. Once you've inked it, it's there. So I think I will use this one for the hair. So I'm just going to draw in some of these hair shapes. We'll add lots more flyaways to the hair with pencil. But right now, I'm just going to stick with this. I'm going to add a little bit of kind of feathering at the bottom of her hair because it's not straight. Do this side. Curls and hair can be quite, I mean, it's fun to draw, but it's also quite difficult, especially when you're starting out. It took me a long, long time to be able to just draw it from looking at a picture. I really struggled with it. So if you struggle, you have my sympathies.
I relate.
It took me, it was definitely the thing that took me the longest to figure out how to do. And now I'm reasonably confident. Not always. I still avoid really curly hair. I do it occasionally, and I probably should do it more because I always think the thing that scares you the most, you should do the most, because then you'll just get better at it and then it won't scare you anymore. But I do find really curly hair quite difficult to draw. The first few years that I was drawing, I mostly picked photographs of people with either very short hair or no hair at all. I have so many pictures of bald men and women with shaved heads for my early portrait drawing days, just because it was so much easier if I didn't have to think about hair. And I'll still do one every now and then, just because I don't want to have to think about how to do hair for a day. So I'm going to switch to my finer pencil and just outline the eyebrows. And you can see my pencil drawings are quite scrappy. I have lots of lines. So at this point, when I'm kind of drawing in features, I have to kind of look at those lines and figure out which one is the right one. So, and I'm just going to add these lines under her eyes too. And adding these lines in reminds me that I want to draw something there. And maybe we'll put a line in for where her eyelashes are. There we are. It adds a bit of character as well to someone's drawing when you add some of those lines in. So at this point, I think I've outlined most of it. So I'm just going to erase. This is where you see all the wonky lines you've drawn, like here. Ah, and I didn't do the ear. I just spotted. So let me put the ear back in. Just check where it should be. Somewhere like that. And I think there's some hair coming off above it. So now we have an ear. I always find when I'm erasing that there's bits that I haven't drawn in. So I just have to draw them in then. I didn't draw the side of her face there either. I can come back to that. I will remove all these dirty marks in a moment. So I try and ink in the bare basics. So what I need to do a drawing, but not too much detail, because all the detail I'll add with colour pencils in the second stage. So I think I've got most of it there. Where's my brush? And just push it off. This is the Faber-Castell drawing brush, and this is exactly what it's designed for, and it's great. It gets rid of everything very quickly. So I'm just looking, and I can see some things that I might add back in. So I'm just going to add something there. Yeah, I mean, I think her hair should probably come in here a bit more, but I can do that with pencils, and I'll add a line so I know where her parting sits. And I think so we can keep changing it. I use color pencils at the end to do all the changes that I haven't got yet. I should say, if you're using Copics, especially if this is your first time using Copics, always put scrap paper underneath. Because if you don't, the bleed through will mark your next drawing page. But if you have, I just used it. These are just old photos that I've drawn from. I just put those every time I finish one, I put it underneath. And then this will all be marked at the end because the Copics will line through, will go through and they'll mark this. So then I'll just throw that one away and go on to the next one and turn it that way so I can't see through the paper. So it's a good use for your, if you've printed out photos. But if not, you can use anything. Just put some scrap paper underneath. If anyone is about to throw out sheets of photocopy paper in this house, I'm like, give that back. I can use that for my scrap. So yeah, I don't let people throw out paper because it can always use it to go under here. So I'm going to add a bit more detail to the hair now. And I wait until after I've done the erasing to do this. Because while the pencil lines are still there, it's quite hard to see where the different shapes sit. So, and I've still got some dirty marks. That's the worst thing about erasing, is all the dirty marks you get. So, I mean, these lines are really just to help me draw later. They tell me the direction of the hair in each part. And of course I can look at the photo, but it's much easier if if I have these lines drawn in. So, and I try and keep them as fluid as I can. Another one there, then a few here. And that will just help me when I'm drawing later to figure out where the curls go. Have a little bit here. Okay, that's as much as I need.
My Allie is frowning a little bit.
So we're going to start.
She's being critical of my drawing.
It's really interesting how if you change a feature just a tiny bit and don't get it quite
Yeah.
right, the expression becomes completely different.
Right.
It's amazing.
Well, I made her chin too pointed, so but I think I can
My
So-
chin is really scrappy, but you won't notice. I promise by the end. I have, error lines in everything I draw, but by the time it's finished, no one else will notice most of them.
That's right.
Only me. So I'm going to mark in her. Actually, I'm going to use the other end. So this is an E70. I'll show you the color. So I think Copic call it ash rose. So it's a pinky gray. And I always use this at the beginning to mark out where the shadows sit, so that before I do anything else, I know where the shadows are. So in this drawing, there's one here. There's a little one here. There's in this drawing, the photo, sorry. There's one just down the edge here. And then there's quite a lot around her. Oh, there's maybe a little one under her nose. There's almost always a shadow on the end of the nose because of the shape of the nose. And when you've drawn enough faces, you kind of know where to look for them. But you should still look for them because we don't know the lighting situation. And they might not be where you expect. But you do eventually get used to, or you know where to look.
What about her right temple? Okay, I see you're doing.
Yeah, there is one under there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start down this side with that one. And the reason I use this color is by the time I've finished it, more or less disappears under all the other colors, because we'll use some gray for the shadows a bit later. And obviously we'll use a skin tone. And I just find that this color disappears. So it's really useful at this point, because it just helps me know where the shadows are before I start. There is also here some really nice light. So that yellow light from the back around here on her chin. And I didn't really I didn't notice that when I was choosing my colors. So we can do that with color pencil. So there is a bit of a shadow, but it runs into that kind of orangey yellow light.
You're a little fuzzy, Helen.
Am I out of focus again? Thanks. There we are. Yeah, it's quite hard to get enough light to get these document cameras to work really well. You wouldn't believe how many lights I have on all around me, and still it feels quite dark. So there's a little bit of shadow here as well. And then pretty much all this side of her neck is in shadow. So I usually use the chisel tip rather than the brush tip, but I realize I've drawn her quite small. So I could have drawn her much bigger. So, and maybe I'll just put a little bit there just to kind of remind myself that there's this dimple in her, where her neck meets her chest. Oh, and I haven't done this one. And often you think you've done all the shadows, and then you come back and you suddenly see new ones that you hadn't noticed at first. And that's fine. It's just part of the process of drawing. Yeah, I've missed out quite a few. There's this one here. What you do under the nose can be quite tricky, because sometimes you can make someone look like they've got a mustache. And I've done that many, many times. But if you do that at this point, don't worry about it. If it's still there at the end, we can get rid of it with color pencil again. So there is a very slight shadow down the side of the neck. So I'm going to put it there. That's probably all I need with that pen right now. So then I'm going to add what I think is most like the main skin tone. But I'm going to leave space here for a lighter color in the middle of her nose, top of her cheeks here, in the chin. And those are classic. I mean, one of the reasons I chose this photo is it's a classic straight on, highlights all where you would expect them to be. So, and not too much shadow. So we're going to go everywhere. We're going to leave these spaces out. And if it helps, you can draw them in with I can draw them in on here. So there's one here. There's one here. There's one on the end of the nose. There's maybe a little bit there and there. So if it helps, draw them in, and then you'll understand the shape. And also a little bit here on the neck as well. It doesn't have, you don't have to draw it exactly as it is. But I always try and create those sorts of shapes. So this is E00, which Copic called Cotton Pearl, and it's my favorite skin tone for sort of Caucasian skin. So I use this in pretty much, yeah, most of the portraits that I do.
You're
And
on
I like,
E00?
yeah, E00, and I like doing the skin tones with a chisel tip because it stops me being really fussy.
I don't know if you can hear my cat, but he's...
I can't, no. My dog was barking earlier, but I don't think anyone heard. I think Zoom is pretty good these days at shutting out background noises.
Yeah,
It
it's
wasn't when it
distracting
first
me,
started. Yeah, I remember when it first started and you'd hear everything that was going on in somebody's background, but that doesn't usually happen these days. It has some kind of noise filter on it. So we're gonna use a lighter skin tone on the spaces where we've not put this in. So don't worry, don't think that it looks odd, because we'll add a different tone. So looking down this side of her face here, I think it is darker. Obviously we've got the pink as well. She's got very pink cheeks, which we will bring in. But at the moment, I just want to do the main skin tone. You can use this over her lips if it's easier. So I sometimes do and sometimes don't. But we'll be adding other colour on top.
What about the eyebrows?
The eyebrows, I go straight over the eyebrows. Because, you know, you look at people's eyebrows, you can see skin underneath them. There should be some. So I always forget to do the very insides of the eyes, though. And I've just remembered. So I'll go and put those in. And down on the neck, most of the neck is this darker tone, except for this little highlight here. Oh, I've gone right over the edge there. Don't worry about that, because we'll actually, I didn't put in a darker color, but you can go, if you do that, you can add in a darker color over her sweater. So then I've got this one, which is E with 4 zeros, and there's an E with 4 zeros, and here's the E with 3 zeros, and I think there's almost no difference between them. So these are what I would tend to use. Maybe this one is a little bit peachier. So that's the 3 zeros, and this is the 4 zeros. And they look almost the same. That one is maybe slightly darker. You don't need both of them. You can just use one of them, whichever one you prefer. I'm going to use the 4 zeros because I filled it with ink. Now I know it has ink in it. I'm going to put the 3 zeros away. So I'm going to use the chisel tip again and go over her whole face except for her eyes. So I go over all the bits I've already coloured in. And that's because I like the ink to be wet on the page. I always find that it merges in better if you use more and more layers of ink and the ink is quite wet. So we will add pink cheeks as well, but right now we're just going to add this. So I'm just going over everything except for the eyes. I don't want it in the eyes. So I'm going over the mouth now. And I generally use this at the end as well. So once I've done all the other colours on the face, I'll add this to the final layer. Again, to try and make everything wet and merge in quite well together. So now I'm gonna add those pink cheeks. So I have two different pinks. So this one, I think I brought this one out thinking I'd use this on the lips. Yeah, oh, that end is dry. Yeah. So that's for the lips. I don't think I'm going to use it.
Is it the R20?
Yeah, I've got R32, but again, they're almost the same. So it doesn't matter which one. I find them interchangeable. I usually just use whichever one I pull out first. But I'm going to use that for her mouth. I don't know. I'm debating whether to put it down the edges of her face, but I think I won't at this point. So I've got the RV00. So this is a really pale. It's this really pale pink. It's a really nice color. I don't like a lot of the Copic pinks, which is why I use this one most of the time because I really like it. So she has pink around her eyes, cheeks, tip of her nose, and the bottom of her chin. And that's very typical. You'll find that on most people, most photographs. So this is quite pale. It doesn't, I mean, it shows up, but without being really strong, which is why it's so great for using on faces. If you need something stronger and you don't have another one, we'll use color pencils. I mean, I usually just use whatever I've got out, and I'll add colored pencils later. So I'm going to give her, I usually just style it out with the cheeks because it's so hard to figure out where the pink on cheek starts and ends. So I will usually just do a curved shape. So it's a very stylized sort of cheek. Oh, my pen is leaking. That's because I filled it earlier. So I've got much more pink on the end of the nose than I wanted, but it doesn't matter. This happens to me all the time because my pens are quite old. I've had them for a long time and I refill them every time. So sometimes when they've just been refilled, they can be a bit leaky. So I'm just putting some under her neck a little bit. And actually there's a little bit of pink along the edges of her neck here too, around the collar of her jumper. So we're just building up colors bit by bit, layer by layer. Maybe I'll do her lips now. So for the lips, with a Copic, with Copics, I'll usually do a lip color. I'll add some shadow, which we'll do in a moment, with grays. And then a lot of the texture you can do with pencils. But what you can do, I'll show you in a moment, which I didn't think of when I did my list of colors I was going to use. So I'm just trying to get the edges right here. Yeah, that looks okay. What you can do with the lips is, I'm trying to find, where's my colorless blender? There. If you have a colorless blender, which is the 0, there are two things that I use this for. I don't use it for blending, but I use it for lips, and I use it sometimes if I've gone over the edges like I did here and I want it, I don't want it there. These work a bit like an eraser. So you can see mine's really dirty because I've used it so much. It needs a new nib. But if you kind of go over those edges, the color, the leak, the bit of color that's gone over that line will disappear. So it's gone more or less now. So they work a bit like an eraser, but also I use them on the bottom of a lip, and I usually just dab with it, and it gives you a bit of lip texture. We might have to use this again in a bit. If you don't have a 0, you can use, I don't know, you can probably use that skin tone, the E with 4 zeros, because that's really light as well. But if not, don't worry about it because we'll add texture with color pencils. But it is a really useful thing that you can do with that pen, which I find otherwise a bit useless. So I'm going to add some grey. So I have 2 greys. Again, I'll show you the colours. So that's the C3. C just stands for cool. So that's cool grey 3, and this is cool grey 1, because there isn't very much shadow on her face. So we don't need really dark shadows. So Copics have how many different sets? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different sets of greys, which I just happen to have because someone bought them for me as a gift. but you don't need all 5. You just need a couple in, I would say either a cool grey, because I find cool grey best on a face. I've got warm grey, but I very rarely use them. All the other ones they've got are toner greys and neutral greys. So you could just get neutral greys or toner greys and use those instead. And you just need 2 contrasting colours. So I don't bother with the numbers in between. So I don't bother with the even numbers. So I almost never use my cool grey 2 or 4. I just use the odd numbers. You just need them a couple of tones apart. So 2 a couple of tones apart will be fine. I mean, I've had all those other ones and I hardly ever use them. So I'm with the cool grey 3, which is the darker one. I'm just going to go over some of these shadows. So the shadows that I've drawn in are dark enough to have a cool grey 3 on them. Ah, and mine's leaking. This is what happens when I fill it in. So I have a lot of grey there that I don't really want. So at the moment, I'm just going to ignore it. There are lots of ways of dealing with that when that happens. Maybe in a moment I'll use the colourless blender so you can see how you can deal with that with those. When I first started drawing with Copics and that happened to me, I just scrapped the whole picture. I'd be like, oh, no, my picture's ruined. But it's doing it again. But some of the ways I developed of using Copics, I developed from having to deal with leaks and respond to them. So now I don't worry at all about them.
You're out of focus again. Focus.
Oh, am I?
Camera.
Why are my cameras going out of focus so much today? There we are. But thank you for letting me know.
No problem. I try to do my cut first and then look at yours.
So I'm going to put a tiny bit at nostrils, not too much. So that's the darker grey, and then this is cool grey 1, so it's the lighter one. Quite often on a face, half of the face will be in a very light shadow, so enough to use this. In this case, her face really isn't. But again, I'll do, as I did with the skin tones, when I did the lighter skin tone, I went over the darker one. I'll do the same with the shadows. And just let them sort of sit outside the edges a little bit so that they merge together. So I'm just making a slightly wider shadow line with the lighter one, if that makes sense. So here you can see a shadow going down the side of her nose, but it's quite light. So I'm just drawing that in with this pen. So I'm going over the shadows that are already there, but just extending them a bit more. So there is almost always a shadow at the edge of the eye that comes in. And very often this shadow down the side of the face will move over to the eye. And I think it does here just. So you can just join those shadows together. Don't worry about it if you don't like the grey. These are quite light greys, and we'll be adding other colours on top. And then we'll be going over it with the main skin colour. So the grey will look much less grey. But I like having strong shadows. You don't have to make them as strong as mine if you don't want to. So I'm going to put some shadow down here because although it's orange, there's a real orange highlight. If we put the shadow, when I add colour pencil, it will show up a lot more. And you can also use the shadow to kind of shape the nose a little bit. There's always a bit of shadow under the mouth, and I forgot when I was using the darker colour to add a darker shadow to the middle of her mouth. So I'm going to do that now. So I've gone back to my C3. I'm going to use the brush end because I want it to be quite fine, but there is shadow. So I'm just using the very tip of the brush to just add a little bit of shadow. And then we'll use the lighter grey to move it out a bit more. And if you get it wrong and you make a mess, don't worry, because we'll go over it with colour pencils. And colour pencils are just the best disguise for shadows that haven't quite worked. Quite often, if I'm doing lips like this and the mouth is only slightly open, I'll just draw it closed. I just can't be bothered with trying to put in the tiny detail of a mouth open. So just for the sake of speed, and because because I think you can just do that, I will just close the mouth. So I don't know if I want this all over. Maybe I do want it all over her neck. I'm not sure. No, maybe not. I will cover most of her neck, but not all of it. I'm going to leave space for highlights there. So I go back and look again, and I can see other places where I need to add a bit more shadow. So there's a little bit of shadow here on the top lip. And can you see that the dark in the lips has almost gone? And there's shadow on this side of her mouth. So I'll add that in, and maybe a little there. I think perhaps I've drawn the shadow too thin, so I'm going to bring it out a little bit, but I think that's probably enough. What I am going to do is go back to my C3, so my slightly darker grey, and just add in the shadows in her hair, so that when I come to doing the hair, I know where it's darker. I need to use the chisel tip. My brush tip is a bit fluffy. So there's some shadow there. There's maybe a little bit down here. And this will just help me when I'm drawing in the hair to figure out where I need the darkest tones. And because her hair's dark, it won't show up. Or will barely show up. And oh, I just realized that I didn't add skin tone to her ear, so I need to go back and do that. I will put it in shade as well. But she definitely doesn't have a grey ear. She needs some skin tone there.
Oh, honey. Oops, sorry.
Just a little under there as well. And I've just noticed, this is what happens as you draw. You notice things that you didn't draw in. So that there is hair at the back there. I've just put in a line for that, and I'm going to darken it. So I know I need to colour that. So the other colours that I will usually use for skin tone on a Caucasian face is, so this is a BG10, but there is another blue that I use a lot as well. I'm just trying to remember. It's this one. So again, I think these are pretty much interchangeable. This one is just slightly more green. So there's B with 3 zeros, which is called pale porcelain blue. Or there's BG10, cool shadow. And yeah, I think they both work fine. So that is the blue one, the B with 3 zeros. This is the blue-green one. So it's a little more turquoise, but I don't think you need 2 of those. If you're going to get a light blue, just get 1. So I want to add a little bit of blue to her face. And again, I'm just looking, seeing where I can see blue, and I can see blue here under her eyes. on the eyeballs. So I will usually draw the eyeballs in with a light blue because they're not usually white. They do have white highlights in them, but we'll add highlights at the end. So I will usually add blue on the eyeballs. There's some blue here. There's a little bit here. There's a little bit around her mouth. And maybe some here in her neck. So, and the more, again, the more you draw, the more you kind of learn to look for those colours and you have an idea of where they'll be. So I'm going to put a little bit, oh, and that's a very leaky. That's a very leaky blue. So I'm going to blue her eyeball anyway. And then the highlights will show up really well. I'm going to put a bit down there. So this is spreading quite a long way with mine because my brush is a bit leaky. You might not want it to make the blue as big as I'm making, but I don't really have a choice. It's just my brush that's doing it for me.
Is this the same blue that you use over the eye like we did in Procreate Shadow?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can usually see blue in a face. You can often see yellow, but not always. But even if I can't see yellow, I will add it because I think it brightens faces and just adds something. So I really like to use yellow. So this one I've got is a lily white. So it's a very pale. The yellows are quite strong, the Copic yellows. So this is the palest one. So it is a bit green. It's just the palest one I've been able to find. If I find a lighter one, there is, so the yellow one, this is the regular yellow, which is Y00. They call it barium yellow, but it's a little bit, there's not that much difference. It's a little bit sort of almost fluorescent. So I don't like it as much. But anyway, you can use any light yellow. And if you don't have a yellow, we'll do it with colour pencils, which I'm going to have to do for the orange because I did put a yellow out. So I'm going to add yellow, looking at the picture here, around the edges. There's some there. There's quite a bit around her eyes. Obviously here where we're going to go on top of it with, we'll go on top of that with orange in a bit. Quite a lot of yellow in her neck as well. You don't always see that in photos, but in this one, I think you can see quite a lot of it. And obviously there's some down her, the side of her hair. But I think that will probably be best done with pencils. So I'm just going to add some to the edges of her face and around her eyes. A bit at the bottom of her nose. And then I can see quite a lot on her neck. So I'm going to use the fatter end. So there we have some yellow. I'm going to fill in her eyes because I don't like those vacant eyes staring at me. So this one is E79. It's a dark brown. There are several. I have 3 or 4 dark browns that are all very similar. So any dark brown that you've got will be fine. So I'm just going to fill in the whole of the iris. So at this stage, I'm not drawing in a pupil. I'm just filling in the whole iris shape with this brown. I'll add the pupil with colour pencils. And I'm going to use this in the darkest parts of her hair. So I have a whole range of ways of doing hair, but today I think we'll because I've drawn in these shapes, we can do stripy hair. So when I'm doing stripy hair, I'm just filling in the kind of stripes that I've drawn in with a colour. So because I've only bought 2 browns. So this is a mid brown, this is sepia, and this is the dark brown. So I'm going to do where I think the dark should be with the dark brown, and then I'll go over it all with the lighter brown. But we'll add texture to the hair with colour pencils. Don't need to do that right now. So there will be more tones of brown, but they're going to come in when we use colour pencils shortly. Just checking the time. Yeah, we have time. So this stripy hair technique was one that I said earlier that I always struggled with drawing hair. And there was a time where I had no idea what to do with it. And then, especially with Copics, I just found it really hard. And I watched lots of tutorials on how to draw hair with Copics, but I couldn't get it to look right. And then I just came upon doing it this way. And I find it really helpful. So yeah, especially if you don't have that much time. It's quite a good way of filling the hair, but quite quickly. So usually just using 2 or 3 different colours. So drawing the shapes in the hair, then adding kind of stripes that follow the movement of the hair. And then filling them in with several different colours. So obviously we're doing brown hair today, but if we were doing blonde hair, I still haven't done in the ear. I need to come back to that. If we were doing blonde hair, we just use shades of blonde. And all the texture in the hair and the kind of different shades on top of that will come from drawing with colour pencil over the top. So even though the bottom of her hair here isn't dark, I'm going to add some dark just for variation, because I don't want it all to be very, very light. She has very dark eyebrows, but I find if you use something too dark, they look a bit odd. So I'm going to use the lighter brown for her eyebrows, but we can make them darker with colour pencils afterwards. So this is my lighter colour. And with this, I then just go over everything because I've only got 2 shades. If you had 3 shades, you fill in the stripes with the second colour, fill in some more, and then go over it all at the end with the lighter colour. So this is because I've only done 2 colours. I've only got 2 colours today. We can just go over everything else with this. And then we'll go over it at the end with, so I'm going to switch to the brush end. We'll add all the other kind of tones into it with pencils. And we'll add lots of flyaways with pencils. So if you've got all your Copics with you or whatever, and you've got several different shades of brown, you can add another colour. You don't have to do them all just in 2 colours. It's just that I don't really have the time in these classes to add lots of colours. But you can use as many different, you could use 3 or 4 different shades of brown. But 2 is fine. It works perfectly well. And I always try and draw, obviously, in the direction. She does absolutely the opposite there. But I try and draw in the direction that the hair is falling. Because Copic, you do sometimes get stripes with it, depending on the paper and how dry your brush is. And so it's good to have those going in the direction of the hair, because then they'll just make sense. So I need to add in her eyebrows. And I will just block the whole shape and then add texture to them with pencils. So just trying to draw the shape out a little bit. So all the detail, the eyelashes and everything, I'll do in colored pencil. So I'm just going to add some skin tone to her ear. There. And I'm having a look, trying to decide if I need to do anything else with Copics, and I don't. If I had a dark colour, I forgot to put in a dark blue to do her jumper. I would do her jumper, but I haven't. I don't always do the clothing anyway. I don't really have time to do it in these classes, but you could just fill that in. So I've got my colour pencils here. These are, so on Copic drawings, I tend to use Prismacolors because they're quite soft and waxy, and they sit quite well on top of Copics. I tend to use different colour pencils for different things, and these are the ones that I like best for working on top of Copics. So I'm going to start with her eyes and just pull out a couple of browns. Doesn't really matter which. I'm going to have to find somewhere to put my pencils because they're dropping. There we are. So I'm going to just go around the edges of the eye because the edges that I drew with Copic were a bit rough. I'm just smoothing them out. Because we've used quite a dark brown, I then use a light brown to create these kinds of, you know, she has quite light brown on the bottom. So I'll just add that in. I mean, I'm just hatching in a circle. It's still quite dark, so I might look for something lighter even. Maybe I'll use a yellowy brown. I think this is yellow ochre. Yeah, it is. So, because I want the bottom part. Usually the top part of an iris is in shadow because the eyelid sits over it, and the bottom part is lighter, and you can see that very clearly in this photo if you look at the photo. So what am I looking for? I'm looking for black, which is that one. So, and then I'll just add a little shape for the pupil. I still think I might want even a lighter yellow. Maybe this is okay. Just trying to figure out, maybe we'll do the eyebrows next. So I'll pick up, I've got the darker brown that I used in her eyes, and I'm just gonna add just strokes to represent eyebrow hair. And again, I just try and draw them in the direction that the hair in her eyebrows goes. We will add eyelashes, but I usually do those at the end. So I just check what else I need to do first before I do that. So for the lips, you can just, so I've got here, what have I got? I've got a white and a very pale pink. And I'm just gonna, it's not, yeah, this is the kind of skin tone that they do in with Prismas. So I'm just gonna hatch. Actually, that's fine. I don't think I need the white. I'm just hatching tiny lines just to give the bottom of her lips some texture. The top of her lips are darker, so I'm looking for a darker pink. Maybe that one. I mean, I just use whatever I can find, really, that I think will do. So this is the Prismacolor, but I've got no idea what color it is because it's almost gone. So we have this quite dark color just underneath her, where her lips sit. I'm not sure if I like what I've just done, but I've done it. So yeah. So sometimes I almost always hatch on a face. I occasionally shade, but usually it's hatching, and sometimes it doesn't look right. And if it doesn't look right, this is why I have this Faber-Castell rubber, because it will remove not all of it, but most of it. There we are. That looks, I mean, you probably can't see on this camera, but I just had a little hatching and I didn't like the way it looked. So I'm going to shade instead. Just going to shade a little bit just to make parts of the lips a bit darker. Yeah, that looks better. I think I've drawn it a little bit small for hatching. So that's fine. I'm trying to decide if I want to add more pink to her cheeks. Probably not. I think they're fine. I'm just checking the time as well, making sure we've got time to do what we need to do to finish. So I always use indigo. If I can find my indigo. There it is. No, that's not it. Where's my indigo gone? I always use indigo for hatching in the shadows. There it is. But I'm going to do the hair first because that won't take long right at the end. So for the hair, so again, I've pulled out, I've got like 3 different browns. Doesn't really matter what they are, and there's some orange there, so we'll do some orange as well. But I'll just use these and just draw like on top of what I've already drawn. So on top of the Copic, I'm just adding texture by doing really flowy strokes with my pencil. Now, I don't have time to do all the hair in this class, but you can spend a lot of time doing it. I don't usually spend a lot of time, but I might spend a good 5 minutes at least just adding. And definitely
Did you say you were using indigo?
I haven't done that yet. I've put that on one side. I'm going to use, that's going to be the last thing I do. So at the moment, this is just a dark brown. Yeah. So, and I quite deliberately, when I'm doing hair like this, I'll go over the edges because I want the flyaways to add movement to the hair. And that's what I'm using them for. So I will always go over the edges. And this, I find this really fun. I love doing this part. And you'll see that
it really helps bring it together.
Yeah, I think it works really well.
And gives it texture.
Because Copics just look flat. And I have seen people do wonderful work with Copics where they can get them all blended to blend into each other and look fabulous, but I've never been able to do that. However hard I try, it just doesn't work. So this is what I like to do. And it doesn't take long. You can do it quite quickly and just and you can use more and more colors. So I usually start with the dark and then go up. So then lighten up. So yeah, these are both kind of mid browns. So I'm not going to do that much just because of time, but you could do lots. I probably will add some afterwards, but I'm going to do the orange in her hair. So I'm going to find a nice kind of yellow orange. That one, which for Copic is called Sunburst Yellow. And the thing about, if you use dark color on the hair, then light colors will really show up nicely. So if I know I'm going to use color pencils, quite light color pencils, then I will usually draw something quite dark in Copic because I know that the color pencils will show up well. If you're adding them on top of a light color, they don't show up that well. But yeah, this is giving a really nice orange tint to this side of the face. And if you do it and you don't like the way it looks, so you put some yellow and I've put some there and I don't really want it there, you can just pick up your dark brown again and go right over the light color and the light color will disappear. So you don't really have to worry about making mistakes because you can just work over it. So she needs eyelashes and she needs shadows. So I will always, the end of a picture kind of like this, I'll always come in and hatch over the shadows I've already drawn where I need them to be darker. You might find that too much. You could shade or you could just use a lighter color. You don't have to do what I'm doing. But I love indigo and I love it for shadows. I think it does a really nice job. So I'm just going to go in. And occasionally I do this and I don't like the way it looks, but I just use my eraser and remove it in that case. So, but I like to make the shadows quite dark. And you can vary the width of your hatching. So if you want a shadow to be really dark, then you hatch closely together. If you don't want it to be very dark, then hatch further apart. Or you can just shade over it. I have to do the orange on her face as well. So I'm gonna just go over her chin just to make it a little darker there. And then I'm gonna hatch in down here.
I had too much coffee this morning. My lines are a little shaky on her chin.
The other place I often have to hatch actually is the nostrils, because they tend to disappear in amongst all the other colours. So I just hatch them back a little bit. And then I'm going to do eyelashes. So actually I might use black because my brown is a little bit blunt. So I'm going to use my black, which is sharper. So I'm just going to draw a line around the top of her eyes first. And then for eyelashes, I'm literally just kind of sweeping out from her eyes. I usually do them quite far apart at first and then come back and add some more in. And she has a lot of eyelashes on the bottom as well, so I'm going to add a few in. I don't always add eyelashes to the bottom of the eye because sometimes they can look a bit strange. And what I will do if I do that is usually just try and smudge it. And I'm looking and I can't see my smudger. So is that it? No. Somewhere I have a smudger. It might be in here. There it is. So you can, there are various kinds actually. I've got different ones. So this one is a pencil one, which is, I assume it's just wax, and you can smudge things with that. I like the blender pens. These are Derwent blender pens, which are designed for blending color pencil. So the bottom of her eyelashes, I'll usually just blend a bit just to smudge them a little bit. I always think of it as a smudger because it just smudges. Especially if you use Procreate and you're used to having a smudging brush there. This does very similar thing. If you just go over your lines a tiny bit with that, I mean, I think it probably has alcohol in it. I don't know what's in it, but it will just smudge the lines a bit. And then I'm gonna add a bit more black because her eyelashes are looking a bit thin. So I will add a bit more. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Okay, and at this point, because I'm almost finished, I think I might use some more yellow on the hair to make it a little bit brighter here. So the hair is something at the end that I will often spend quite a long time on because it's quite fun to do these pencil lines on it. And if you have time, you can do that. I'm not going to do that right now. I am going to add, I've just noticed, still hadn't done the colour on her chin, so I'm going to do that. So I've done some light yellow. I'm just hatching here a little bit to create that highlight colour there. And a little bit, I'm going to hatch in between my indigos to add the colour around here too. Yeah, now she has more orange. I think I might add a little bit in her face and around the edges of these shadows. And maybe we'll do it on the edges of the hair here. And then the only thing really left to do is the highlights. So I always use a jelly roll. I have used other pens. So I used to use pilots, but pilots don't work very well over polychromos, not polychromos, Prismacolor pencils. I find they tend to collect the wax and then they don't work. So these ones I find are generally the best. And jelly rolls come in different thicknesses. This is the number 10, which is the thickest, which I really like. So I'm always going to add the highlights in the eyes. And then I'll usually just put a little bit in the eyeball as well. And that's why we do the eyeball in blue. Because then if you add a little highlight in there in white, it shows up more because it's going over a light blue rather than over a white. And I think that's probably finished. I've just seen here that there's a lot of light orange and yellow colours on her hair there as well. So I'll just add that little bit. And the more you look, the more you'll find. So if you leave your drawing and come back to it tomorrow, you'll see all kinds of things that you haven't put in it. So you kind of have to decide at what point you're going to finish it, because you can carry on playing for quite a long time. But it's fun, so why not? I'm going to put some yellow in her neck too. Yeah, so I think that's finished. So it looks very white, and her face looks very white in the zoom, but she actually does have color, quite a lot of color in her face. So I will share that and you'll be able to see it. But does anyone want to share? If you share now, you'll be sharing on camera.
That's
happy
fine.
to share on camera? Yeah.
Sure.
Great.
All right.
So I'm going to spotlight you.
It is.
Oh, nice. It looks like her too. I think you've got more of a likeness than I have. Oh, it looks great. I love the hair.
Yeah, this side, well, that is what her hair is doing. I could do some flyaways there though.
Yeah, it's really nice. I love that you've gridded the drawing as well.
Yeah, I had time before class, so I did it.
Yeah, that's great.
I just do it in inches, so it's not so hard.
Yeah.
Great.
Fabulous.
Yeah, I still have the hatching and stuff to do, but yeah, the eyes turned out pretty good. I was skeptical.
It's very nice. So Sharon, do you want to share? Let me just
I'll share.
Over. Go on. Let me spotlight you so we can see. There we are.
Okay. I really hate her hair. I got to work on that.
It's hard though.
Well, I didn't give her enough height, I think, in the crown of her head.
Yeah.
You know, it just looks, her hair looks ragged and I hate it.
But that's practice. That's practice.
You know?
And what I would say is when you're drawing the shapes in the hair, make them bigger. So, because the shapes are often quite big. And I think
just
if you make, to give lift, especially on the top of the head, if you do sort of slopey lines going up, curves going upwards, then it'll kind of lift it above the head. So yes, exaggerate.
She looks like she just rolled out of bed. It's really bad.
Maybe she did. But the
just washed her hair.
The face is great though.
I'm sorry?
The face is great. The tones in it are lovely. Yeah, really nice.
All colored pencil.
Wonderful.
Oh.
So next week, I think we'll find us a man to do, because we need to do a man. I might find a beardy man. There's lots of beardy men. It's really hard. Well, on Sketchy, it's really hard finding men who don't have beards for some reason. I know. Sketchy attracts hipsters, and there's lots of guys with beards, but it's a struggle to find faces without beards.
They like your beard.
I'll find a man with a beard and we can draw him. So I think that's it for today. But yeah, thank you. It's been fun. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And it's been so nice to be back using my Copics after a few weeks of not using them. So, yeah, great. Okay, I'll see you next week.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye. You're welcome.
Bye, Sharon.
Bye.